Chapter 6, Alpha City Foundations. The Alpha City Resort became very successful. Over the course of several decades, it was not only one of Europe's top vacation resorts, but also gained a worldwide reputation, drawing vacationers from all over the globe. During these decades, the reins of the league passed on to a new generation. John, Milt, Patty, Scott, and Jordan witnessed the success of the Alpha City Resort and stayed involved to some degree for the remainder of their lives. Their successors, who included each of their children, picked up where they left off and led Alpha City into the next stages of its development. Like their parents, they as well never saw the complex fully reach what it was designed to become many years previous, but their children did. Jacob, Jordan's oldest son, writes, quote, "The resort was so successful that it was difficult at times for us not to just put the whole cooperatist thing to rest and simply enjoy that success. But those thoughts were kept in check by the dedication of the people involved in the league. There were so many people committed to the cause, good people, John's kids and their spouses, my brother and sister and their spouses, and so many other friends and colleagues that had come to make up the core of the league. We all reminded each other and helped each other recommit during those times when it was difficult. Our parents had left us a legacy. It was our job now to continue that legacy. My father's extensive financial empire, along with the tremendous financial contributions generously made by the numerous other financial heavyweights, gave the Alpha City Resort every possible and imaginable advantage to succeed, and to succeed big. And that's exactly what happened. Long before it even opened its gates for business, it received so much media hype that we had solid bookings far into the future. This was an investor's dream, a real gold mine, but it wasn't making anyone rich. The profits that were made, and there were a lot of profits made, were not paying off CEOs, shareholders, or corporate backers. Thanks to the dedication and commitment of all the wealthy league members and their steadfast adherence to the financial plan that was devised for this project at its inception, the profits were poured back into the project itself and not used to ensure the speedy recouping of the investments made by these financial angels. In fact, not only did we not recoup, when possible, we threw more money into it. This yielded an enormous amount of working capital, which allowed Alpha City to steadily and consistently expand every couple of years. New sectors and facilities included in the original design, but that were not part of the initial resort complex, were added as time and money allowed, keeping Alpha City on its long-term goal of evolving from an international resort into an international city. A city that would be run by on-site residents in an environment that would be as close as it could come to cooperatism. We knew there would be compromises. It was surrounded by a nation and a world still firmly paying homage to a money system. Outside supplies, resources, products, and services would always be needed to some degree, and that would require money. As Carl Henderson had so brilliantly conceived, the resort profits would serve as a continual cash flow, so internally, Alpha City could be money-free for the future residents. That was what we were carefully working toward. We kept reminding each other that we had to be patient and thorough. Having a successful resort was only the first step. Little by little, facility by facility, things had to continually move forward. Each component of this complex, when added, had to be smoothly assimilated into the overall long-term plan. A tremendous amount of logistics were involved. As each new facility came on board, in addition to it carrying out its unique function, we also figured out ways for it to be part of a guest attraction. Everything in Alpha City was designed to be a guest attraction, and also on the cutting edge of technology. It was all state-of-the-art. Guided tours of behind-the-scenes workings of Alpha City became some of the most popular attractions. Internal power generation was one of the first steps in making Alpha City more self-sufficient and less dependent on externally produced services. This would be followed over time by the ability to cultivate agricultural produce through the construction of expansive, ultra-modern greenhouses, the means to produce and repair tools, equipment, and parts for all of the many faceted areas of the complex, internal water and sewer facilities, the ability to produce textiles and fashion building materials such as stone, plastics, and metals, and the means to produce electronic components for the tremendous amount of high-tech equipment used for the day-to-day functioning of the resort. The goal was to push the internal independence envelope as far as possible. The hard part was knowing that much of this might not happen in our lifetime. That was sometimes very frustrating. It was difficult to be so committed to and remain so excited about something you may never see completed. We had to concentrate on each step and rejoice when another small piece of the puzzle was successfully in place. Many of these internal functions needed to be handled before we could begin transitioning employees into residents. That was certainly going to be a tremendous milestone to reach, but one that might take decades. What made it easier was to continually remind ourselves that at some point, a future generation, hopefully not so distant, would be able to reap the benefits of our diligence. End quote. Dane Jorgensen, one of the project engineers, recalls this, quote, "Initially, the project goal was to become the European Disney World, a high-tech futuristic fantasy land with marvelous thrilling attractions and state-of-the-art accommodations. It was built and functioned primarily with this in mind, and was managed and grew as any other venture of this kind, building its reputation and expanding its impressive array of activities and attractions. By the time I came on board, this had all been firmly established, and we were in the process of adding a power-generating facility equipped with the most advanced and efficient oil-powered turbines. Solar panels had been built into the original architectural design from the very beginning. 3 wind-powered turbines towered over the parking lots, with several more slated to join. They were creatively designed into the resort's futuristic landscape. Of course, the power generated from these on-site renewable energy sources was minimal and was used as a bonus power. Until now, the main power needs of the resort were purchased in the traditional way from an established Belgian power company. But with the addition of this new on-site power plant, the resort's power needs could be sustained internally. Only the fuel would still have to be purchased from outside sources. The entire resort operation was completely dependent on electric power. All of the resort transportation and almost all of the equipment was electric. Alpha City was committed, whenever and wherever possible, to implement ways to limit dependence on fossil fuels. As technology continues to advance in the fields of renewable energy, it is hoped that someday this complex will be powered solely by renewable means. As an example, modern state-of-the-art greenhouses were always part of the long-term plan and were designed not only for creating stunning floral displays within the resort and growing on-site produce, but through solar chimney technology, they would also be able, in a small way, to contribute to the resort's power needs. End quote. Another employee writes about the agriculture. Quote, "It's all sustainable agricultural techniques that are used, organic soil replenishing processes, as well as extensive use of composting and other renewable procedures are implemented to build a sustainable ecosystems of sorts in the greenhouses and in the open pastures. The idea is to cultivate as natural a process as possible and one that can be sustained under normal circumstances indefinitely." End quote. We now continue with some of Jacob's later memoirs. Quote, "The Alpha City Resort had exceeded all expectations, but the only way for the project to attain its true goal was for employees to become cooperative residents. The upgrades, improvements, and high-tech facilities were added with this in mind. The ratio of employees to guests grew as the resort expanded. The number of residents would eventually exceed the number of guests. This is true for any city. The residents always outnumber the tourists. As this happens, a transition would eventually be necessary. By transitioning employees to residents, residents would essentially live for free. They would have no rent, utility bills, grocery bills, car payments, etc. Their living expenses would drop dramatically, but so would their wages. However, they would be able to keep more of what they earned because their cost of living would fall to practically zero. The hopes for this employee transition was to build a workforce that wasn't there for a paycheck, but that had a stake in the success of the project and therefore take ownership for their contributions to that success. In any business venture, this latter element is always desirable, but not necessarily essential to its success. But for the Alpha City project and its long-term goals, it was. In the second decade, it was determined that the process of converting the employees to residents needed to begin. End quote. We continue now with Lydia Dancy, one of Carl Henderson's daughters, and some of her recollections. Quote, "First, the residences had to be built. They were to be innovative and state-of-the-art, just as everything was in Alpha City. A great deal of planning, engineering, and creativity went into their design and construction. They were ultra-modern and sleek, and built to be extremely versatile in terms of individual layout. The foundation and supporting columns were placed in such a way as to make it possible for room layouts to be altered to a degree by changing certain wall positions, giving residents the ability to be creative and somewhat unique in how they arranged their interior space. Also, two singles could easily be altered into a double to be utilized by resident families, although in the beginning family residents were rare. But as time went on, it was expected and hoped that families would very much begin to be a part of the resident population. Early on, being a cooperatist was not a criteria for being hired. In fact, the large majority of the employees in Alpha City's early years were not cooperatists. Employees were hired in the same way employees were hired in any other similar industry at the time. But decades later, once the residences were completed, things began to change. As this new transition took place, the connection between Alpha City and the League became more obvious. Soon it was common knowledge that the famous resort was planning to become a cooperatist experiment. This did not adversely affect the number of vacationers reserving their week or two. If anything, it increased bookings. People were curious. None of this happened overnight. It was a slow transition. Once the word was out, though, cooperatists from all over the world began to apply for positions in Alpha City, and it was from this pool that new hires were chosen. Over time, the employee population became entirely made up of Cooperatist League members. Each new recruit was informed up front of the intention of management to build a cooperatist environment, and in accepting the position, it was understood that they were in support of such an environment and would willingly participate in the changeover. This was more of a formality than anything else because once it was rumored to be a cooperatist venture, only those with sympathies in that direction applied. Architects, engineers, plumbers, electricians, carpenters, welders, machinists, construction workers, and mechanics were all handpicked based on their talents and experience, but more importantly, for their commitment to the type of life that was materializing here. We needed people who wanted to build a cooperatist society. We didn't recruit people just for their skills. Luckily, we were always able to find a satisfying balance. Employees working for the Gragon Corporation and its subsidiaries out in the field internationally were called in and given the opportunity to join the Alpha City project. It was in the project's best interest to start with the best, most highly motivated group it could pull together. So the process was very selective. End quote.